Hi, my name's Rebecca Lee, and I co-wrote this book, The Mercury Detoxification Manual, with Andy Cutler, PhD. And today I have an interview with Robert Smith Hald. And Robert Smith Hald is a Norwegian American who has lived most of his life in Norway after an early upbringing in the USA. He was born in Pennsylvania, Dutch country, in Lancaster County, where plodding Amish horse-drawn buggies ruled rural country roads, disturbed only by the sounds of growing corn, the odd trundling gas-guzzling clunker, buzzing bees and dragonflies, and German Shepherd guard dogs barking at pretty much everything that moved. He grew up partially there and in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley area, topped off with a couple of years on the outskirts of a sleepy small town called Manchester in South Michigan, not far from Ann Arbor. After that, the family moved to the end of the world, literally. Both the farthest outreaches of Western civilization, close to the Russian border, and the northernmost, far above the Arctic Circle, where the sun does not set in summer and never rises in the winter. Or as the locals put it, there's white winter and then there's green winter. Robert later put down roots on the western coast of Norway, close to the city of Bergen, where he lives now. Robert is a singer-songwriter with 3 studio albums on his conscience, as well as several radio signals released. A 4th studio album is in the works of release in 2024. He's also a music and English teacher and a champion amateur beer brewer of many, many years. He has worked as a brewmaster and a beer designer for Norway's largest family-owned brewery, managing and running Norway's first microbrewery, designing some of Norway's best-selling commercial craft beers, all still in production. He's also an author at Norway's largest publisher with a book on home brewing and how to make your own recipes and create award-winning beers. So that's a very good curriculum vitae, yes.
Thank you.
So I'm going to add here that Robert, as a musician, suggested that I add a musical intro to these interviews using the part of Grieg's Hall of the Mountain King that musically illustrates the mania of the trolls, that he thinks this is particularly well suited to the theme of chelation. So I'm going to definitely attempt to do this. Anyway, so Robert, please tell us something about how you got poisoned, what that was like, and how you figured out what you had to do to get better. We're all ears.
Well, the last podcast that I watched with you was with Brian McBlain, and I liked what he said about the different types of people who, you get people who can't really excrete heavy metals very easily, and then there's types who can, so they can build up a lot. Yeah. And I think I'm that type, and because I have a lot of mercury from my mother had a mouthful of amalgam. My father worked with lead.
Really?
So we had lead, yeah, and that's a part of my toxicity story as well. He worked in an enamel shop that he used powder that was glass powder with lead in it to put it on bowls, and then it would get fired in a kiln, and they didn't use any kind of equipment for to protect themselves at all, or special clothing, or they had just a simple dust mask, and that was that. And everybody who worked in that shop lived with us when they would come home, and they had the dust all over them. Wow. So it kind of started there, and it was fascinating to listen to Brian McBlain's kind of up and down. That's what made me think of the Hall of the Mountain King, because that piece of music goes up and down and reaches a crescendo. And
wait, was that in the States or was that in Norway?
That was in the States, yeah. Okay. That was in the States, yeah. And I got, we had a family dentist that we went to. We called Dr. Messup. His name was Dr. Messa. He said, I'm going to count to 3, and by the time I get to 3, you're going to be finished. And he did a lot of counting to 3. So I think I had 7 or 8 amalgams by the time I was 12. And I remember how that affected me, and I went from feeling fine to completely wasted. And then I would, recover and be okay for a while until the next time I went to the dentist. So fast forward to going to Norway. We went to the north of Norway. There was a school dentist there. Like in America, you pay for your dentist. And in Norway, the state pays for the dentist until you're, I think, 18. And that was not good for me, because when I went to the school dentist, he was a bit of a criminal, and
A lot of
he
people.
filled almost every single tooth. He said I had 56 cavities, and
66.
he filled 56.
Wow.
Excuse me. So he filled every single tooth except for the 4 bottom ones, front bottom. And I had amalgam in every single tooth except for the 4 front top. So I had a visible amalgam on the sides as well. And pretty much it took 2 or 3 months for him to get that done, because that was living hell, because it turned out I didn't, the Novocaine didn't work on me. So that's another story. But pretty much within weeks of being done, I started to have really strange symptoms, which I know now are adrenal, with a lot of anxiety, a lot of not being able to sleep, a lot of problems with my gut and my breathing, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved back to the States, to that place where I'd grown up, and I worked there for a year, 6 months of it in the same enamel shop. And then after those 6 months were passed, then I was screwed, basically, because lead increases toxicity by factor of 100 to 1, something I know now. And
How old were you when you finished in the amalgam shop?
How old was I when?
How old were you when the coup de grace, when you finished in the
enamel shop?
enamel shop? Yeah.
I had just turned 18, so I started working there when I was 17, and I just turned 18 when I was finished.
Isn't that terrible?
Because I grew up there. It's a life sharing community, and volunteer work and that kind of thing.
Oh, that's right.
So I went back.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then it was just, from then it's just been it's like roller coaster ride health wise, up and down. And I've had some good years, and obviously to be able to do all the things I've done with the music and beer and all these kind of things, but I've had health crashes after health crash after health crash, and it's affected a lot of things, detrimentally. But and they also follow, in hindsight, they follow new exposures that I had when I removed the amalgam, because I wanted it out, because I had all this trauma around getting it placed, and I didn't really actually think about it being dangerous per se. I have used the same dentist to do all of that work, luckily, because when I then started with the protocol, I knew there was no amalgam left, because he's a good dentist, and even he'd offered me to do it using the safe procedures, with the as the protocol lays out. But I didn't really think, it was me who said, no, I'm not going to do that. I can't afford that anyway, so I don't really think it's that dangerous. But luckily, he's also a good dentist, so he managed to protect me from that.
It's you, yes. Yeah.
So then it just, kind of got out of control, and I had my latest health crash, and this time I wasn't coming back. It just, nothing I was doing was working.
What happened?
And well, what happened? It's just, it goes in cycles, doesn't it? I mean, I had gone, and I've been steadily getting rid of these amalgams, and I got rid of 2 or 3 of them, massive ones and molars. And in hindsight, that's what started it. But I had also started, following different biohackers and so-called, what do they call themselves? These health gurus and all that, and was into cilantro and chlorella, everything on the no list on Andy's protocol, and that made me really sick. Plus, I found what's her name? The Walls diet, which is Walls and Gundry, which is basically high thiol food.
You're sensitive to thiols?
Yeah, almost exclusively high thiol food, and I'm super sensitive to thiols. Yeah. So, you know, for me, it was like, because I grew up like I did in this, you know, this life sharing community, which is, you know, it's actually a religious sect, and they had a lot of strange ideas about health. And having grown up and had a lot of weird experiences there, I was not interested in any kind of alternative medicine. So I had, you know, gone to normal doctors for years, and it was frustrating because, you know, you go to a doctor and they tell you you're the most healthy person they've ever seen. There's nothing wrong with you, but you're sick, and they can't fix you. And in the end, they say it's in your head, and I'm like, this isn't in my head. And so so I was talking about it with my wife, and we started searching for a functional doctor, and found one. And he said, took some tests, and he said, you know, I'm afraid it's most likely, this is to do with metal toxicity. And I didn't, you know, I thought, you know, this is bullshit. I don't believe this. This is crap. You know, this is a waste of money. That was my first initial thought. And but then I started looking into it, and I found you know, they're called podcasts now, webinars, you know, YouTube videos with Andy. And because he suggested I look into the Andy Cutler protocol. And so I started reading, listening to these YouTube videos. I ordered the Amalgam Illness book. I read that. When the Mercury Detox Manual came out, I ordered that. When did that come out? 2017?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. No, so it was after that. So I ordered that. And it's just, I had all these jaw-dropping moments. You know, I was reading about all this stuff that was like
2019.
19, that's right. And that's 19 is when I went to the doctor, and I think that came out just after, and I ordered that as well. And then I went onto the Facebook page, and I started reading people's stories, and it just blew my mind, because it was describing me to a T.
Yeah.
And with the amount of amalgam that I've had, and the mercury from that, I haven't had vaccines, because I grew up without vaccines in that life sharing community. But I've had, you know, in vitro mercury, 56 or some 60 or some amalgams, all removed, all but 3 removed unsafely. I should be dead, you know. And lead, the amount of lead I have was just, I mean, it didn't show up on tests, obviously, because it doesn't. But as soon as I started to chelate using the lead protocol, I had
You felt it.
It was just enormous. So there's a lot of lead there. Anyway, so in the end, for me, it was like, okay, I'm long way down. One last thing. I got to do this, because I was, you know, starting to had cognitive decline. I mean, I couldn't remember my songs anymore. I couldn't write songs. Well, they were few and far between. And then just before I got sick, I was in studio recording 3 or 4 songs that were then going to be released as singles, and my voice started to warble like an old lady.
Ooh.
which is a symptom of ALS as well, right? What's it called? ALS. You know, that neuron disease where your voice starts to,
Yes.
yeah.
Lateral sclerosis, lateral sclerosis, yeah.
Right. And you know, everybody was like, what the fuck is going on with you? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I've never had a problem with my voice. And I figured out, though, if I ate thiol-free, not knowing anything about the protocol, I figured out that if I ate thiol-free, that stopped. So I had to eat thiol-free for about a month, and then I had to go into the studio and finish it, and I knew something is going on. Something's really not as it should be.
That must have been very
kind of
confirming to read about the thiol sensitivities.
But that's my point. It was like jaw dropping, because I had been through every single thing, and just like 5 or 6 years before this, I had gone to another clinic and they had given me a whole bunch of supplements to use. And it turns out that was the core four. And that had made me feel a lot better if I had got a lot more done. Yeah, basically. They never mentioned mercury or heavy metals at all. And you know, the Western medical corporate system doesn't want people to know about heavy metals, and they want to keep people sick, you know. And
It
you know,
sure looks like that. Yeah.
What? Excuse me?
It sure looks like that. Yeah.
Well, it's either that or extreme ignorance, and I don't think it's
It's as
extreme
good,
ignorance.
it's as good as, you know, even if it's not a plot, it's as good as a plot, because that's how it
Because
works.
the result is the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, the result is the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I won't say, you know, publicly the name of that doctor, because he could be, you know, he could lose his license just for saying that. You know, so I call it an illegal disease. And but my doctors that I have, my regular NHS doctors, they agree with me, but they can't say that publicly. They can't, and they see the progress I've had and still have. So it's kind of bizarre because, you know, they know. So my doctors, I'm not talking about the functional doctor. I'm talking about my regular GP.
Okay.
He can't say it. He can't say, yes, I agree with you on paper, but he says to me, I agree with you between us, because he can't say it publicly. And that's how it is.
Does he admit that that's why he can't say it, or is he just not?
He says he can't say it because they're not allowed to say that that could be a problem.
Okay.
Right. So, and you know, that's the reality. So I'm not surprised at all with all this stuff that happened with COVID, because it's the same kind of corporate medical system that has money interests before health.
I wasn't surprised either.
Right. So then I started the protocol. I had, when I went to that doctor, I still had, I think, 3 amalgams left over to take. I mean, to remove, and in the same tooth, because, you know, people say, how the hell can you have 56 amalgams or 60 or something? And that's not possible because you don't have that many teeth. But I have polka dot molars, you know, it's like all over the place. So I did that. I did that safely. I had a speck. I found it, and
by looking at the X-rays.
Huh?
You found it by looking at the X-rays?
Yeah. And I didn't feel anything different until that speck was gone. Went home and says, I don't know, it feels just the same. And so he filled the tooth, and I went back. He took the X-rays, and I went back the next day, or maybe 2-3 days later, and I could see the speck. And he agreed, and he removed the speck, no free of charge. And boom, it was like, you know, switching on a machine. It was just like, it just felt amazing. You
felt way better once you got everything out of your mouth, even before you started chelating.
When everything was gone, it was just like a switch had been turned, and I felt amazing. Okay, and so I was hooked on ashwagandha. That was like a supplement that gave me a lot of energy. So I had 2 good months, and I started to I used lead protocol because I knew I had the lead.
Right. You could you could start that right off. Yeah.
So my plan was to do that for 3 months. I did it for 14 weeks to start with, and I had a lot of gains immediately. Like, I have had no sense of direction ever my whole life. Like, I'll ask for directions. I'll be like, if I'm in town or walking, trying to find a shop. Like, I remember once I was going to a music shop, which I'd gone to hundreds of times before. I could never find it, and I asked the woman if she knew where it was, and she looked at me. She was like, "Do you turn around?" And I was standing literally in the door. I didn't know where I was, right? So yeah. So as soon as I started using the lead protocol, every time I was on round, it was like I could navigate. I could navigate in my mind, and I could navigate. I could see where I needed to be, and I could figure out. And it just each round has made that easier, and more. Like in the beginning, it would go away. After the rounds, it would just disappear, and I would be like, "Oh, here we go again. I don't know where I'm going." Right. So what you do is, like Brian said, is you kind of make a route. Okay, that route to get somewhere, you have to do that route. And if there's a traffic diversion, you're screwed. You can't figure that out. And
I remember this symptom. Well, yeah. I told you, I guess it was Brian. I told him my brother used to draw lines.
Yeah, the chalk on it. Yeah. I never got that far. I wish if I had thought of that, I would have done it. But anyway, so I did it, and I went into the dump though after the 2 months. The dump hit hard. So my dump was supposed to start, what is it? He says between 6 and 9 months in. My dump started.
That's the peak.
Yeah, my dump started like that. I mean, it was overnight.
Just felt
I was on vacation. I was on vacation in Scotland, and everything was hunky dory. Next day, boom, not hunky dory.
You want to explain what the dump is in a short fashion, so people know what you're talking about?
So when your body is receiving heavy metals, mercury, it's kind of in a mode of, what am I going to do with this? I got to store this somewhere. And when that stops, your body eventually figures out, oh, this situation is over. Now we can, get it out. It wants an equilibrium. It's not a conscious process. It's just a bodily function that it's going to try and get out these heavy metals.
I kind of like the conscious function description, though. But go ahead.
You kind of like the what?
I like the conscious function description.
Yeah.
But go ahead. I mean,
it feels if it was, then we could say, no, stop today because I need to be sane for this meeting or something. But it just is like a runaway train.
Is a
for
mind
some anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'd like to I have to say, it's not that bad for everybody. I mean, Andy did call it the stall phase. He didn't call it the dump. We call it the dump. He called it the stall phase because for most people, they just don't get. First, they get a lot of initial gains. They feel great for maybe 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year. And then they just don't get any more gains. They feel kind of off. And that can last for, well, is it 2 years?
Yeah, he told me that the longest he'd seen was 18 months, but I've seen plenty of people that have gone longer than that. That's really confusing too, because you don't know whether you're just not making progress because of this natural process, or whether you've got hidden amalgam or a speck or something.
Yeah, and it's like, and you think, and then Andy's the protocol. He says that if you chelate during the dump, you will feel better and it'll pass quicker.
Pass quicker, yeah.
But if you chelate at the same time as you have a speck, you'll make yourself worse. And you're kind of, when you're in the dump, that's the worry, because you're and so that's the problem. But I was never I never worried that I had amalgam. I know I didn't have amalgam left, because that's been a conscious thing that I followed from I was 20. And I'm really good at seeing specks. I mean, I don't do it in the group because I want the dentist to do that, but I can see specks. And so
well, that immediate feeling of relief, and then the progress you made and then hitting the dump pretty much means you were following the classic.
Yeah. Yeah, and I figured that since I was I had such a heavy load of heavy metals, that's why my dump hit hard and fast.
Right.
And but that also, in retrospect, I think that I probably had a massive candida buildup because of the DMSA, because DMSA lowers neutrophils, and that can create a situation where candida gets out of control. And I have candida and had lots of candida back then. But at that point, I had used a lot of antifungals and had done a lot of candida protocols. and I had when I got sick, I had visible candida in my face. I mean, I was at the hospital. They were like, I can see it, but it's not killing you. It's like, go away, you know. I'm like, well, I'm miserable. Can I get, I mean, they only gave me antifungals, but I got it off my face. And because I'm a brewer, I was using, you know, like 80% alcohol and spraying it on my face and getting this stuff off. And, but I had it internally, and I didn't realize how the symptoms of that are similar to mercury toxicity.
Right.
And so I think actually, if I had, in retrospect, if I had been more aggressive about candida and used more supplements rather than antifungals, then that would have been, life would have been a lot easier in the beginning and during the protocol. There's been plenty of times when candida has really, you know, taken off and given me a lot of problems, and now I've figured that out. I'm making more progress quicker. But I want to say something else about this with the DMSA, because what blew my mind most with the DMSA was that I'm a musician, and I'm self-taught on any, you know, I can play pretty much any instrument. Well, no, not really. So kind of guitars, banjos, mandolins, harmonica, but I couldn't master the piano. And we grew up with pianos, but I wasn't allowed to play them because, you know, it was a fucked up, you know, environment. And so we had like grand pianos in the houses that were locked and things like that. So, but I listened to classical music. We weren't allowed to listen to rock and roll music, but I would listen to get a really good classical collection. And so that was the first music I would make was piano in my head. And when I went back at that age, when I was 17, 18, there was a piano in the house that I was staying at, and I was trying hard to learn. And I couldn't master it because I was getting, well, in retrospect, because I was getting poisoned, and I was poisoned with mercury, and I was getting a huge lead load. And so, I never gave up. I tried. I had band members who tried to help me up. When I was studying at the teachers' college, I had several, three, I think, tutors. I had a private tutor, and a couple pianists in the band, you know, keyboard players in the band who gave me tips. I had a whole course that I bought from Nashville. My wife bought me a piano, you know, an upright acoustic piano. And I couldn't do it. I could take out chords, and I remember I gave up. But the last thing I did is I played this song, and this line comes to my head, and I found a couple of chords, and, you know, I could play chords, but I couldn't play them together in a, you know, in a rhythmic way. And this line comes up, and it's God, get this poison out of me, so I can breathe, so I can see, so I can sing. And I'm like, that's too fucked up. What the hell does that mean? So this is in 2000 and
came into your head.
Yeah, it was, right? But I gave it up. I couldn't, I mean, for the one, I couldn't figure out what the song was about. And for two, I couldn't actually play. I heard it in my head, but I couldn't actually play it.
So it was before you knew about being poisoned, actually?
This is in 2007.
Okay.
So 12 years before.
Wow. Oh, golly.
Yeah.
All right.
So fast forward to 2019, actually 2000 and just after New Year's, 2020. So the piano is in the living room, keep it all nice and shiny, get it tuned 1 to 2 times a year, and it doesn't get played. So I'm sitting there, and I'm on round 14 of DMSA. And for those who are watching, a round means you take a chelator on its half-life for a minimum of 63 or 64 hours, depending on what. With DMSA at 64. So I've done 14 rounds of DMSA at a low dose, 12.5 milligrams. And I'm looking at the piano. All right, so I get up, and I'm kind of drawn to the piano, and I sit down and I open it up and start playing, and that song, and I can play it. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I get my song book and I write the song, and I finish the song, and my wife's like, what the fuck just happened? And I'm like, I don't know, but I can play piano now. So, and it started with that. And every round I get a little bit better. I mean, I practice constantly too. That helps. But when I'm around, I play better. I have better rhythm. I have better ability to play two hands, different voices, and get new ideas and write new songs. So, once a month I do a DMSA round and I write a song. So, and the next album's going to be mostly songs written on the piano, and that just blew my mind. And when I go back and read Andy, he talks about how, well, lead causes cognitive issues, and it causes cognitive issues that are kind of like, as I understand it, the cognitive issues you experience when you first were poisoned, like say you're learning the times tables or something when you're first poisoned, you'll always have problems with that because lead stays in your body and it kind of cycles, and it's kind of made as I understand it, it's like it's made a route and it goes on that route. And
yes, he calls it a constant source of poisoning throughout your life because it's cycling in and out of your bones.
Yeah. And also it's affecting certain areas of your brain because it's made a route there. And for me, it made that route whilst I was learning to play piano. So when I get it away, all of a sudden you regain the plasticity in your brain, and you can do it. Or if you were as tenacious as I am, because I kind of did give up the piano, actually, to tell you the truth, I did. But not in my head. I mean, I still had a lot of ideas in my head, and I still have much better things that will come out as I get better to play, because I can't play them yet. So I'm not at that, like I'm not at that level yet, but I'm having fun with it. I'm learning, and that's because of chelation. Yeah. So,
that's a great story. Yeah.
Mm.
How many
So
how many years, I guess we might say, how many years have you put into this chelating?
so far this is year 4 in September.
And you just do it, you just do it every week still?
No, I have to take it goes up and down. I've had to take, sometimes I have to take a break of 2-3 months, sometimes I'm fine every week. So I've decided, I think what I've done, like I feel really good at the dosage that I'm at now, but I realize that it burns out my adrenals after about 3 weeks, and then I have to take a couple weeks break, and then I'm okay.
Okay.
So that, and that's changed. Sometimes I've had to take a break of 2 or 3 months, and often though that's been a mix of candida and adrenal fatigue. But for me, the adrenal fatigue is really the biggie. And right now, I would say the last year has been a very, like, I suggested the Hall of the Mountain King because that piece of music kind of starts out really kind of beautiful and kind of mellow, and then
bang.
and then it goes bang, and then that's kind of how I feel it is now, because people who are contemplating on doing this, they should be aware that heavy metals are, mercury is the most toxic non-radioactive substance known to man, and it's bad to have in your body, but when you're moving it, there's a certain risk of that too, and not to push it too hard. I think I pushed it too hard sometimes. I mean, we all do.
Mistake people make.
Yeah,
it's the biggest mistake people make. They don't realize, there's no profit in pushing this too hard, ever.
No. But we all want to get better, and it's amazing.
As soon as possible.
I think it's amazing with the gains that I've had, and I still have, and just this summer, it's kind of like something extra clicked into place with cognitive function and experience of self-awareness, clarity of mind, and you start to think, well, this is, like, for me, I'm thinking I remember feeling like this when I was a kid. And it's like, oh, this is me. I'm, 50 something now, 54, I think. And I'm starting to remember who I was and who I thought I was when I was like 7, because that's actually when the toxicity started. And it's really weird to get to that point, because everybody else is like, well, the norm is that you move on and you never really remember that kind of feeling, and I'm getting to experience that, so it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
You look good too, I must say. Watching you
Thank
talk,
you.
I'm thinking, yeah, you look like there's, when you look at people, you can sort of, I mean, it's gotten so I can tell, who's toxic
Yeah,
just by, the vibes they give off, it's you have that same experience. And Andy used to say you could sense another toxic person
that's
crossing.
right.
And he also said you can always tell who's toxic with Mercury because you really like them.
Yep, you have an affinity for them because
Attracted to
they
them.
yeah, that they experience reality like you.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is, and you just click straight away. And but then usually you end up, there's problems with that person. I mean, toxic people are
They got a lot of problems,
abrasive.
especially if they're
Yeah,
completely unself-aware. That's kind of hard to deal with.
yeah, that's an interesting point, because I've been thinking a lot about that, because as I get better and as I understand toxicity, and I read a lot about toxicity in the world, not just Andy, just I read a lot about people there's a lot of people who write books about their chelation experiences. There's a lot of people who write books about people who were toxic. And even though there's a lot of literature out there, it is really, I'm not saying it's suppressed. It's not suppressed, by any kind of organization. It's not that, but people don't want to believe it, because most people are toxic to a certain degree, and they don't want to talk about it, because then they'll have to take a good look at themselves and, start to, deal with that, and they just don't want to do it. And one of the kind of, the what's it called, Alice in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter, right? So
Right.
one of the common symptoms they talk about with Mad Hatter syndrome, isn't that what they call it? Is
Erythema
this,
borealis.
yeah, but it's the stubbornness. It's this stubborn difficulty, right? They're not going to listen to their foreman. They're not going to listen to what the man says. They're difficult. They're really stuck. And people are really stuck, because a lot of people, almost all people have, all people have some metals, but there's a massive amount of toxicity in the world, I think. And I think that's what's behind most of our problems right now. And there's a professor, what's his name? Just look it up, I wrote this up. Yeah, Jeremy, I don't know how to pronounce it, Enriago. He's from, I think, Nigeria or Niger, and he is a Canadian, and then now he's become American, and he's a professor in Michigan. He's 80 years old, and his specialty is heavy metal toxicity.
Really, I
And
have
he
to
wrote
read about this
yeah,
guy.
exactly. And you've not heard about him, and neither have I. I mean, I had to really, really dig deep to find him. So now I found his name. I know where he works. I'm gonna get his books and read about it. And he published a book in 1983 where his theory was that the Roman Empire fell due to lead poisoning.
Well, I've heard that often. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was absolutely attacked for it, and it still is attacked for it.
Oh,
But not on the merits of what he knows about heavy metal toxicity, but on his quotation of classical works and his quotation of historical works, on his academia, not on the merits of what he knows about heavy metal toxicity, because they don't want to talk about heavy metal toxicity. And that's just a cycle that keeps repeating itself over and over. And part of it is I think we live in a toxic world, and people don't want to, well, people can understand it, but don't want to understand it. Everybody's busy. What can I eat to make myself feel better? Nobody wants to think, what can I do? Nobody wants to, nobody thinks about taking stuff out of their body to make themselves feel better. It's always, what can I eat? And then you have the corporate structure that's like, shut up, just eat your food. And if you go to a vet, they're going to tell you to give supplements to your dog. If you go to your doctor, they're going to laugh at you for taking supplements, because they want you to take some medicine, because that's what it says in the book, because the book was written by the corporate medical system. And even Isaac Newton, father of modern science, he used the money that he made on selling the book, Principia, I don't know how it's pronounced, his math book, Principles of Modern Science, all the, natural laws that he compiled in there. He used that money to buy mercury. I mean, big things of mercury.
Big things of mercury.
This is documented, right? He used that money to buy mercury so he could make gold. Okay, that's documented. And actually, there's a episode of Pawn Shop. Have you seen that? That in Las Vegas they have this pawn shop.
Are those the guys that look at your stuff and tell you if it's fantastic or not? Yeah.
And sometimes it's like $5, or sometimes it's $500, or 100,000. It's like, Anyway, there's a guy who has had Newton's book on alchemy that he used with his notes.
He really believed in alchemy. He
Huh?
wasn't going to mix it up with a bunch of dirt and extract it that way. The way they do the artisanal miners. He was going to transform it into gold.
He was going to do that, and he did that. And well, no, he didn't make gold, but he did try that. And the book that he used to do that was sold at that pawn shop. And I wondered to myself, how much mercury is in that book? How much is still off-gassing off of it?
Was his book.
Yeah.
like he used to drip a little mercury in there, like my cookbooks.
The guy was insane. They actually have the notebooks where he describes what mercury tastes like. because he was a scientist, so he tasted it, all these things he did, and he heated it up. It's all documented. He made mercury vapor. He filled his whole room with mercury. The guy's batshit crazy. He went batshit crazy.
He went crazy.
His health was totally ruined for 4 years, and he wasn't able to work. He had no more contact with anybody. 4 years, no contact with anybody. He had one friend left in the world, and he fell out with him. That friend came to his rescue, and they secured him his last job, which was the what they call it, the something of the mint, the Royal Mint. He was the boss of the Royal Mint, because he was Isaac Newton. They couldn't have him living in poverty, so they needed to give him a job that was. And he's responsible for the the coins that are I don't know what it's called, but the pattern on the coins. If you take a modern coin like a quarter, it's got the serrated edge. That was Newton's idea, and the reason for that is the problem back then was people would cut off clippings, right? Mm-hmm. So he did that, and then you would see it. Anyway, but he's also infamous for one other thing, which isn't spoken about in history as much, and that was that he was successful at getting the last man hung, drawn, and quartered in England. What it was
responsible for the last episode of that.
Yes, and what it was, I don't remember the guy's name. I'm bad at that kind of stuff, but it was a person who had counterfeited, or according to Newton. So he wanted to make an example of it. It was some businessman who counterfeited not paper money but metal money somehow, and I think it took him 4 petitions to the crown until he was finally granted. I mean, the guy was done for counterfeiting, but Newton wanted to set an example, and Newton had 4 petitions to the crown to have this guy hung, drawn, and quartered. And you can Google it.
How pleasant. Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
So it's a known fact, very well known, and for some reason, it's Andy's the one who's called the lunatic, you know. Well, not the lunatic, but the anti-science. I don't know. It's unbelievable. So it's a red. Well, you don't see that in English. It's a theme in our history from the Roman times with toxicity, and the Romans also had the biggest mercury mine in the world,
right, you
which
mentioned
is that one in Spain is still there.
Almadine in Spain. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. So
I certainly have noticed, literary personalities who, when you read, sometimes, I'll get a book by some classical writer from the 19th century or the 18th century because they're free on Kindle and there's an introduction describing their life and, gee, they become recluses and went mad in their old age. You wonder, what's that about? Like Gogol.
yeah,
And
and with your
they used a lot of mercury in medicine back then too.
yeah, they everywhere. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it was a toxic. Well, it was a toxic world, and it still is a toxic world.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
It was, yeah. I think that when they started using lead arsenate everywhere, around here, that was the real debut of the heavy duty toxicity in the environment, though. I mean, there were
and
just
that was
a few people with it for syphilis with mercury, but I mean, heard what Brian describing the pesticides they used on that orchard he grew
yeah.
up. God, and that's all
That's
still
that
too. It's still in the land.
still in the land, yeah.
He said
And
after
that
a while, it
that's the lead arsenic, right?
Yeah,
Or
and they were
Brian used
using mercury something or other.
mercury bromide.
Mercury compound, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, but the amount of like this guy who wrote about the Roman Empire, he's actually shown how they poisoned themselves, using the lead in the aqueduct, they made thinking
Amphoras.
Norwegian no grapes. They took grape juice and they boiled it down so that they could add it to wine that had soured, because back then they made, I mean, I'm a brewer, right? So I know how these things work. So they made wine out of the wild yeast that was on the wine. Today you add yeast, you pasteurize the juice, and you add a yeast, and you can control what's happening much better. But they couldn't control that. And so the wine would eventually sour really quickly. It would go to basically vinegar. So they made a sweet, they call it sapa, and it was grape juice boiled down in lead, and because lead made it sweeter, and then they would add that to the wine.
A pleasant smell too, because I remember walking in. I was trying to rent an apartment once, and I walked into this apartment that the guy was renovating, and I said, "It really smells sweet in here." He says, "Well, that's the lead paint that I'm removing from the windows."
Yep, that's exactly what it smells like now. That's what that enamel smells like. But anyway, so he talks about the various modalities of how they received the toxicity, but he knows how much lead was produced, kind of gives it in a ballpark, and the amount that's been produced and released in the environment after that is astronomical, right? So you and I were talking before this podcast about how people can live a long time with lead, mercury, arsenic, all sorts of toxicity, a long time. So living a long time and managing to get through your life without dying shouldn't be a goal anymore. I think it should be more of a goal to get the toxins out and have a better life and also a better world. And there's no room for that in a modern world, because they just want to keep selling shit and not cleaning up.
It causes a lot of negativity psychologically.
Yeah.
I think the Lead is, people already know that. I know, there was an article about it in Mother Jones magazine years back about lead poisoning in the inner cities, and postulating that our jails are just full of lead toxic people.
Yeah, that's right. I read that. Yeah, but it's like everybody thinks that because leaded gasoline is not sold anymore, it's not a problem. But people just don't get that it's not going to go away, not very quickly anyway. I mean, I read something about several times. I've read articles that are written, recently about the lead toxicity in London because for some reason the lead isn't leaving the soil. I don't know what their reason, because they haven't figured it out. I don't know. I don't live there. I don't have any idea about it, but it's not going away. The amount of lead in the soil is the same as it was in the 70s.
Well,
in London.
Around here where I live too, it's all these old houses. They all had lead paint. I always wondered about Paris. Here people live in the most fabulous, beautiful city in the world, and they're so bad tempered. And like, I was wondering, the lead from from all those beautiful old houses.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's what it is. So, what's one other thing I was thinking about in regards to toxicity?
You got anything else to talk about?
No, there was one other thing I wanted to mention about that with the modern toxicity. We'll talk about something else. It'll come to me.
In modern toxicity, there's a lot of interesting stuff. It seems to be like it's going on heavy on the endocrine disruptors. And Andy said to me that he thought the elephant in the room with all this gender stuff was the xenoestrogens, the endocrine disruptors.
Yeah, but is mercury an endocrine disruptor as well?
Yes, it is. Of course it is. How it messes with adrenals and everything. I mean, if you look at Malcolm Illness, I can't remember which page it is. Maybe it's 63. There's a diagram he did about the whole HPA axis from one end to the other, starting in the brain, winding up in your gonads or something, and all the different
that's right.
things and everything. And it shows you all the different places that mercury messes, like in your liver, it keeps you from transforming T4 to T3 and, that sort of thing everywhere. It's interesting. Some places it doesn't do anything, like it doesn't mess with how your body produces adrenaline,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which you don't need.
Really, that's a really, really interesting diagram.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've read it. I'm going to need to be rereading it. I
wanted to write an article about it and reproduce it, but Joanne wouldn't let me because she said he worked so long and hard on that diagram that she didn't want it just to get thrown out there. Right. Copyrighted. But you could, without putting it out there, you could describe that. I did, somewhat. Yeah. It's a good idea, because I mean, you kind of get focused on the here and now and lose the big picture. So whenever I kind of get lost in something, I prefer to read the Mercury manual because it's easier to find things. But Malcolm Illness really has a lot of detail. A lot of detail. But I find that I read stuff. Well, I guess that's sort of how my brain wound up. I find I have a lot of trouble. What's this? I have a lot of trouble retaining, what I read. Concentrate. Right. I'll go into Malcolm Illness and I'll read stuff and it's just like, I never saw that before. There it is. but that's part of toxicity as well. And it's maybe I need to keep going. I mean, it's been 10 years for me. I've been doing it. Well, I remember when I was DMSA, I never did much of that. What was that? I never did much DMSA. Maybe I should give that stuff a whirl. Yeah. You could have lead that you don't really think about because you function well, and it affects probably a certain part of you that you just become accustomed to. I mean, I did it because I knew I had lead. It didn't show up. My doctor says there's hardly anything. I said, yeah, well, there shouldn't be any. He goes, okay, you're right. So I did it, but the results were dramatic, and they still are. I mean, I thought it was. I mean, 4 years, I thought maybe I'm done. So I took a DMSA break and just kind of slowly slipped into, I'm not playing piano very good. So I went back and
just like that. It was better. So, and there's something about, like, I'll lose, like, I lost my train of thought a minute ago, right? And that's because I should be on DMSA round this week, and that happened. I forget, things, and I lose my train of thought, and I'm not as sharp if I don't do that DMSA round. I didn't do it this week because we were, doing something else, and I just didn't want to chelate while I was doing that. So I'm going to be starting that next week. But it's less intense, but it's still there. So, and I'm wondering if that has something to do with my difficulty of remembering lyrics, because it's kind of ridiculous that, songs that I've played on stages for years and just can't remember it. So that's, for me, that's my next thing.
That is the long-term. I had a person come to me once who couldn't remember anything from their high school, this and that. And it was like, and she was like, she didn't have any symptoms otherwise, just that, but
that's a symptom, though.
That's a symptom, yeah. And that's a lead symptom. And then mercury is a short-term memory. I mean, that's what I read in hair test interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but how did she get better when she chelated?
I don't
start
know.
remembering stuff?
Up with me. I saw her once out in the street, and I don't know what happened. Often people will, just come to pick my brain, and then I don't never see them again.
Yeah.
So unless you've got a whole other topic you want to leap into, or anything else you want to add to this discussion that comes to mind?
Yeah, there's that one thing I forgot.
Okay, you go ahead.
So right now in Norway and in Europe, they have decided they're going to, but they have banned mercury in fluorescent lights.
Okay.
Right. And it was fascinating watching Brian McBlain talking about there being
2 grams of mercury. 2 grams.
No, not 2, 30 to 50.
Was it 30 to 50? Well, I was the 2. You see how my memory is good. 30 to 50.
30 to 50.
He said 30 to 50.
I was like,
it was like, oh. Can you imagine putting that on the floor?
Yeah, it's just like, it's insane. So from the new year, they were banned, and most people will, keep it until it blows, so it doesn't work anymore, and then they'll take it out. And they have this system in Norway where you deliver it to the shop, to the grocery store. Come into the grocery store, and they have these boxes where they just shove them in these holes.
Yeah.
Bang, right next to where you put your empty bottles, right? Yeah. So, and so I found a place where I can deliver my empty bottles, and they don't have that. They do it somewhere else. And the guy who works there is mercury toxic. In fact, he can hardly speak. He has to kind of grunt because he gets mercury toxic because he's dealing with all that shit.
Yeah.
So I thought, this is just insane. So I called the renovation company, locally, and talked to the leader there, and I said, so what do you do? I mean, what happens to those fluorescent lights? He says, well, they bring them here, and then we sort them, and then there's a company that comes and they deal with it. They destroy it, they extract the mercury, and then do whatever they do with that. And I says, well, do you often have broken? Oh yeah, every day. And I says, well, what do you do? Well, we throw them into this other room, and then they come and deal with that, and we open the window. And I says, well, what do you do with the mercury that's on the floor? He says, there's no mercury on the floor. And I says, well, where do you think it's going to go? Out the window? Well, eventually. I says, but then where do you think it's going to go? Who lives there? Because I know the area. I'm like, we hadn't thought about that. So I called the company. I know somebody who works at the company who comes and picks it up. And that guy actually quit his job because he knew he was going to become toxic. So they would go around with I don't know how it works, but they went around with patches just like you would in a radio, like in a nuclear reactor. And they would have these patches and they would test them. I guess it's maybe like a gold filter or something that captures it
Yeah,
somehow.
I read about that actually. Yeah.
So they would do that, and he says, and they told him that's not too bad, you'll be all right. And he says, fuck this, I'm out of here. So he got a job somewhere else. And he says, and it's just crazy. So and I was in a so that process is slowly happening. It can maybe take a year or two before it's all delivered. But I went into this area where they were in a shopping mall, and there were these guys, and they were taking down hundreds of fluorescent bulbs and just chucking them, and I'm just like, fuck. And I just booked. I've never been back, but I mean, it's everywhere. You could be walking through a cloud of mercury and not know it. So there's going to be like a wave of mercury toxicity. At least, I mean, I know there will be in Norway in the next.
Just from taking down, because they took them all out at once.
Yeah, just like there's this YouTube video about a janitor who, there's a movie about a janitor who became autistic because he took down all the fluorescent bulbs and he smashed them so they would fit into a dumpster, and then he got sick, and then he chelated and he got better, and then he got sick again because he got exposed. He wasn't aware of it, and I think he was chelating at the same time, and he got sick again. So these kind of things are happening. Yeah,
I don't know that story about the janitor.
Yeah, it's just Google it. It's on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah. So
There's
that's kind of.
Oh, did I
maybe that won't.
The crematorium down at the bottom of my street? Did I mention that to you? It's like there's a funeral home down at the bottom of my street, and it's been made into a pizza parlor and a few other things, and a laundromat and a few things, but there's a huge smokestack still on that thing. So I'm assuming that there was a crematorium there, right? Too.
Well, there is one crematorium in Bergen. So all the people who want to use their services have to go into Bergen. It's right next to the hospital, the crematorium.
That's convenient.
Right. So, but they have to capture the mercury now, and they publish those. Okay. They publish those findings, so you can find that, and it's a lot of mercury, and that's why amalgam was forbidden in Norway from 2008 or 2009. So it's a huge problem, but at least they're trying to capture it.
Yep. I remember reading about some environmentalist types getting upset about bodies being buried in the graveyard, leaching mercury into the
Yeah, that happens too. Yeah. So we could do what they're doing in California, which is turn them into fertilizer. I wouldn't want to use that fertilizer. Right?
There's more than just that even.
And I was watching this movie the other day. It's about. Do you remember there was a tidal wave in Thailand in 2000 and I want to say 8? Was that when it was?
Big freaking tidal wave. It took everything down. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really good movie, and I hadn't seen it though, so I'm watching it. And part of it, have you seen the movie?
No.
Watch it. Part of the story is, and this is true because I know somebody in Thailand who I then messaged about this afterwards. The Buddhist monks, one of their functions in society, one of their most important functions in society, is to take care of the dead, and they have a much different relationship to death. They see it as just a natural part of your life, that when you die, you just are going into a different state of energy or something, and then your body is just to get rid of that. Whereas we have a much more kind of an emotional attachment to the body as well, and all the rituals that we do and the respect for the dead body and all these things. They don't have that. There's stories about ambulance drivers there that pose with dead bodies, like for selfies for Facebook and stuff like that, because the ambulance drivers in Thailand are all or what I've read is that they're all volunteers, and if they find a celebrity who's dead, they're like, okay, I got a picture with me and the celebrity, because it's not disrespectful in their culture. So they have this totally different thing for bodies. And so during the pandemic, not pandemic, the tsunami, they took all the bodies and started burning them. And it was mostly British people, right? So they were just burning them. And they were burning them in the middle of town. They didn't even have big smokestacks. They're just pagodas. And they made wood fires in them, and they burned them there. And so I asked, so in the movie, the plot is all about how, how that's disrespectful and how it turns into this conflict. And I'm sure it was, but I'm thinking, holy shit. So they burn bodies in the middle of town, in every single town in Thailand. And this guy that I know through the chelation has told me that Thailand has an enormous problem with mercury toxic people. And there are doctors who specialize in chelation. They use Andy Cutler.
They do?
They use Andy Cutler primarily. There are people who have translated his work to Thai, their language badly, because this guy's writing, well, this is what it says in the book. I says, no, you need to get the real book. This is bullshit. And I said, and I explained this to him, and he says, so you mean the body's full of heavy metals, and when it's burned, it goes out? I says, well, where the fuck do you think it's going? And he's never thought of it. He says, Thailand is toxic as hell because of it. So it's like, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, right? Then you see all the shit that's going down in society is because of this. And then you start to look around you and say, well, what is that? How long has that been going on? Or, holy shit, that explains that. I mean, we were talking about...
explains a lot.
We were talking about this gilding process.
Yes.
Right? They would take gold, dust, and mix it with mercury and paint it onto a chair or anything. And then they would fire that in the kiln, and that would burn off the mercury, and the gold is perfectly fused onto the chair and looks like it's made out of gold. But if you Google the melting point, or the burning point of wood and the evaporation point of mercury, there's no way all that mercury is gone, because then the chair would be gone too, right? So all this crap happening with all these diplomats and their shiny palaces and their gold gilded chairs, they're all batshit crazy. They're the people running it. Huh?
Versailles, the Napoleonic Empire.
Exactly. And now Putin and all the shit that's going down there. I mean, he's sitting there shaking like a leaf, and it's like, he doesn't have cancer. He's probably got, what did you call it? Mercurialis?
Erythism mercurialis.
Yeah.
Erythism, it refers, I think it refers more to the yeah, it's a syndrome. It's like Mad Hatter syndrome is also called erythism mercurialis.
Yeah, that's one I can't get into my head. Anyway, mercury toxicity. So it's out there, and it needs to be addressed. And I hope more people see videos like this and start to think about it.
Yeah,
because
Brian says that it eventually sinks down through the soil and goes back to wherever the hell it came from, but that may take a long time, and we keep adding to it. So
yeah, that's the problem. We keep adding to it.
Yeah.
So I mean, people are complaining about. Well, we're not saying complain, but the analysis is that the West has a big problem because it's outsourced all of its manufacturing to China and all that, and China's taking over because of all these things. But China's burning a coal full of mercury every single day. How long are they going to last until they're fucked up like the West? With the mercury, I mean. So just keep pumping it out.
So I thought I'd ask people at the end of these interview if there was, I don't know quite how to put it, but if there's something positive, out of this whole terrible experience, if there was anything that it gave you that was positive. Does mercury have an important lesson for individuals that you got, maybe?
You mean, is there a silver lining in becoming
There's something, is there
mer-
something like, like you became a better person because you were sick or anything like that?
well, okay. I've thought about something in relation to that actually, and that is that when you are mercury toxic, or when you have understood mercury toxicity, heavy metal toxicity, and you're getting better, and you're start to kind of understand how toxic the world is. You also realize that you can still be a good person, even though you're toxic, and even though you can, Andy used to talk about how his online presence was really, really, messed up. That he saw that in retrospect, and I see that about myself as well, and a lot of the relationships I've had. I've been a good person through that. I've never been a bad person. I'm sure there's plenty of people who I've pissed off with, in regular everyday conflicts. But it doesn't mean you're a bad person. And the people who are bad people, not the toxicity making them bad people. I don't think that's what's causing them to be bad people. I think they're bad people. And then the toxicity makes it worse. I mean, if you have a person who's not a nice person and becomes lead toxic, and that person more easily succumbs to the rage issues that lead toxicity. Yeah. So being able to see that more clearly is, I think, something that's.
I think you see a lot of things more clearly once you've sort of seen this. Yeah.
Yeah. But you go through a lot of different stages, and I think I still have several more stages until I'll be
Stages to go.
Yeah. And each time you get to a kind of a new level, you're like, wow. So yeah, it's so I guess my positive take on it is, finding the protocol and finding Andy, and realizing that toxicity isn't what makes people bad people. Bad people are bad. Toxicity just makes it worse.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'll close this. I thought that's a good line to close it on. I'll stop this.
All right.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting discussion. I hope people will like it a lot.
Me too. I got a lot of people I'm going to send it to, because I want them to hear about this on this level and hear it in this colloquial way.
All right.
So bye-bye.